So we'll be streaming it live on my YouTube channel. So you can also watch students. Hello.
I believe you can hear me. So if you can hear me, can you type on the comment section that you can hear me? So good day and welcome to today's session. Today we're going to be looking at overview of validation and verification process. This program is powered by Pegasus Consultancy, and my name is Dr. Ali Igoyin. So if you have any question, even as we go, you can drop it on the chat box. So please pay rapt attention to the few things we are going to be discussing tonight. I promise they're going to be interesting and it's going to be informative and educative. So today we're going to be looking at overview of validation verification process. And by way of introduction, or the presentation summary. These are what we're going to be looking at tonight. Introduction, definition, validation of experimental procedures. We're going to be looking at what are the importance of validation. We'll also be looking at the experiment plans, validation process, validation master plan. We have validation master plan content and importance of validation master plan. And we're going to be looking at conclusion. This program is we also have a full-fledged course as a master class on validation and verification. So it's something that you really want to learn more, be more expert, you can always subscribe to this program, the master class on the validation. However, this is going to really be interesting and educative. Please come along with me as we take to this journey for today. So by way of introduction, validation involves performing a test or a process to verify that a particular instrument, particular software, particular process, a particular measurement technique is working properly. We want to confirm, we want to affirm that, hey, this test, this process is working well to verify that particular instrument, that software, that process, that measurement technique is actually working well. So validation, regardless of whether it is a process, whether it's a facility, whether it's an equipment or a product, is a critical part of the organization quality management system. Now, we have what we call method validation. It should be a standard laboratory process, but the process needs not to be exactly the same for every lab or for every method validation by a lab or an organization. So what we are trying to say is that the process may differ, but we have to achieve the same content and the same goal. Now, the role of method validation is establishing a standard process, establishing an effective quality management system that will be needful for the healthcare facility. So when we talk about validation, now, according to the ISO 10725-2005, it defines validation as the confirmation by examination and the provision of an objective evidence that a particular requirement for a specific intended use are fulfilled. Now, what does it mean? Let's say, for example, now let me use the known to describe the unknown for you. Um, um you you actually you actually went to buy a particular product. Now, you want to confirm if, let's say you bought a phone, you want to confirm if that phone has a certain level of memory that the manufacturer have said. You want to confirm whether it can do what they say it will do. So that process of examining it, of testing it, that and providing an evidence that that particular requirement for a specific intended are fulfilled, or that phone can snap so and so thing, that phone can carry so and so memory, so and so data. Those is a confirmation. So that is what validation is. So validation is the action of proving that any procedure, any equipment, any process, any method, any material or activities actually leads to the expected result and produce the quality desired. So that is validation. So we are trying to test a known process with an unknown process. We're trying to test a known method with an unknown method. So we're trying to prove. Okay, let's say, for example, now in the pharmaceutical industry, if they said a paracetamol contains 5 milligrams of the active component, so how do you prove it? So you can validate it to say, okay, at the end of the day, this paracetamol is actually contains 500 milligrams of the active paracetamol component. That is a form of validation. Now, when we look at validation verification is the process of establishing documented evidence, demonstrating that a procedure, process, or activity carried out in a testing and the production maintains the desired level of compliance at all stages. That is why we validate. Validation is usually mainly with reference to a test method or an instrument or a product or a services you can test. Let's say, for example, now you buy a new reagent. You shouldn't use that reagent until that reagent is validated, until that test is validated, until that equipment is validated before you put it into patient use. Now, validation is a scientific study of the process to prove that the process is consistently doing what it's supposed to do, that the process is under control. So validation will help you to determine the process of variable and acceptable limit for the variable and to set up an appropriate in-process to control that process. Now, validation in laboratory practice will help you to assure the quality. It's a form of assurance of quality to help you to reduce costs, and it will also help you for government regulations and other standards. Now, let's look at brief history of validation. The concept was first proposed by two Food and Drug Administrators in FDA, officially named as Ted Byers and Bud Loftus in 1978 in the US to improve the quality of the pharmaceutical. Now, the concept was first developed for equipment and process and derived from engineering practice using delivering of equipment that would be manufactured, tested, delivered, and accepted according to a contract. So then they will produce the equipment. They want to test it to know that, oh, this equipment will actually meet what the contract is. Now, in 2005, an individual wrote a standard by which transport of process could be validated for cold chain products. Now, later, every other sector and industry bought into the idea of what? Validation. Now, why do we validate? One, we validate to obtain consistency, reliable, and accurate data. It serves as a proof in decision making. It will help to assure the quality of a product or the quality of a services. Thank you. Please, if you can hear me on the chat box, please, if you can hear me, please type on the chat box. I can hear you. See, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me on the chat box? Please type that you can hear me. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, yes, I can hear you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, when is validation necessary? When there's a change in established method, when you are using one method, you want to change another method, you have to validate.
When new method are developed for a particular problem, you have to validate. Establishing method used in different laboratories and different equipment or different staff, you have to validate. When there's an out of control situation within internal quality control assurance has done and yet it's not working, you can also validate. You can validate when you demonstration of equivalence between two methods. Example, you bought a rapid kit, and let's say malaria rapid kit, and you want to test it against the standard method, let's say microscopy, you can validate demonstration of the equivalence between two methods. Remember, the rapid test is a different method from the microscopy. So you want to demonstrate the relationship between these two methods, that these two methods is workable, you can validate. I hope I'm communicating. What are the necessary documentation that is associated with validation? We have SOPs, so there must be a standard operating procedures for your validation, specification, qualification protocols, and reports. I will explain this as we go. Validation protocols and reports. I will also have validation master plan. And so these are the necessary documents that are necessary when carrying out a validation. Validation is a big exercise. Validation is a big exercise. Verification is also a big exercise. It assures the quality of any product, any services, or any reagent or anything. So it's something that you can pick interest. And I tell you the truth, if you understand this concept, it could be a path for you, like an area of strength, specialty, even as quality management expert. I've helped several companies to validate their services, their product, their kit, their reagent, and I know how much I was paid, heavily and well paid. So please take it serious. It's a skill, and you can enjoy it. Now, when we talk about standard operating procedures, you all know that there must be an authorized written procedure giving instruction for performing the operation, not necessarily specific to the given product or material, but like a general thing. Like example, equipment operation, maintenance, cleaning, validation, cleaning of the premises, all those sampling, inspections, all these are part of the SOPs. Let's say, for example, you want to validate an equipment, you have to clean the equipment. So maintenance and all those things. So do you need SOPs to guide you towards that? So all those are part of the SOPs. Now let's look at the next component. We look at it as validation protocols. Validation protocol is a document describing the activity to be performed in a validation, including the acceptance criteria for the approval of a manufacturing process or part of thereof for routine. It's necessary to define the specific items and action that will constitute a clean validation study. So protocols are what you will do, what should be done. Oh, the acceptance. It's not when you start the validation, you now begin to define the acceptance limits when the result is already generated. No, all this you have to have the protocol down. Now, validation report. What is validation report? Just as the name implies, it's a document in which you record the results, the evaluation of a completed validation program are assembled and summarized. That is a validation report. It may contain proposal, recommendation for an improvement of the process or the equipment or the method. So at the end of the day, you should have what? A report, which include the record, the result, the evaluation, the decisions that was involved, and a summary of it. That is also known as validation report. In other words, this is the proof of a validation process or a program. Remember, in quality, it has to be documented. So you have to have a report. You cannot do a validation. So we just finished a validation. So where's the report? And we did not actually report it. It was not actually documented, or you can't actually find it. Once you cannot find that report, it means that that validation program was not carried out or is not done. I hope I'm communicating loud and clear. What are the resources required to implement a validation program? You need like the human resource, collaboration of experts of various disciplines. Let's say, for example, I want to validate, okay, I want to validate a molecular procedure. I will need people in that department as a quality expert. I will need people within that sphere of expertise during the process of validation. Example, a multidisciplinary team comprising of the quality assurance, the engineering, manufacturer, other discipline, depending on the product and the process you are trying to validate. So you need what? Human resource. when carrying out a validation exercise. What are other results that is needed? Finance, cost of specification, specialized personnel, and cost of test reagent. You will need money, finance. You need time, because sometimes validation can be rigorous, even within the lab space. A lot of staff runs for me. When you tell them, okay, run 20 samples 10 times in a day, or run it in between days for 10 days consecutively, I say, people will begin to want to run away from me, because it's a daunting task. So you will need time. What other things you need? Those are major things: resources, provision, finance, time, and etc. Now, let's look at process validation. Now, what do we mean by process validation? This is defined as the collection and evaluation of data from the process design stage through the production, which establishes scientific evidence that a process is capable of consistently delivering a quality product. So process validation is validating a process that leads to a particular result. So we want to know that this process you are using for testing, this process you are using for a particular process, particular product, does it give the desired result? Does the process support the quality of that result? Process validation involves a series of activities taking place over the life cycle of the product and a process. Now, process validation is a requirement for current good manufacturing practice. Now, let's say, for example, in places like industry, pharmaceutical company, these process validation are very, very, very compulsory, and they hold it in high esteem. Say, for example, now you want to produce a drug. What are the example I've been using? 500 milligrams of paracetamol. You want to know if all the process, if a paracetamol size is changed, for example, now I'm just using that things you could easily relate. You will have to check the process that is going to lead to that new product. Am I communicating? So let's look at validation process. This is what are the processes do we pass when doing a validation? It must be based on validation risk assessment, what we call the VRA, not VAR, not VAR. And the qualification of the following steps and in phases should be well established. Number one process is the design qualification. We have installation qualification, operational qualification, performance qualification, and component qualification. Am I communicating? If you can hear me, type on the chat box, you can hear me. We have design qualification, installation qualification, operational qualification, performance qualification, and we have component qualification. This may look a little bit really not really interesting to some of us, but just follow. You definitely get to understand it. Remember, it's an introduction to validation process. Now, let's look at some stages of the process validation. Now we have process design, process qualification, continuous validation process, and the rest. Now I'll try to explain the earlier one so that we can be able to understand it. I explained it in the subsequent slide. So I explained the design qualification, installation qualification, operational qualification, performance qualification, and component qualification. Now, what are the types of validation? Please pay attention. Now, there are different types of validation. We have prospective validation. This is also known as pre-market validation. Before a reagent or a kit, an IVD kit is taken to the market, there must be a pre-market. Like for doing pre-market validation is a validation that is done prior to implementation of that product or that process. There is a pre-planned protocol. So this approach of validation is normally undertaken whenever the process of a new formula within a new facility must be validated before routine testing and other things are done. That is what prospective validation. Just like we have prospective students. Prospective students are students who are gaining admission into the school. That's prospective candidate. 2, retrospective. Retrospective, this is used for process facility and process control. In operation, used to have undergo a formal documented validation process. Now, this retrospective, just like when you have research, you have retrospective study. So retrospective study, you gather data and make informed decision. So this process uses historical data, acceptance, and all those things. It's majorly used today for majorly an audit process. So you pick data and do evaluation based on what is already on ground. That is retrospective. Am I communicating? Next is concurrent validation. This is used for establishing documented evidence that a facility or a process do what they purport to do based on the information generated during the actual imputation of the process. This approach is employed during monitoring. So concurrent means that as you are doing the work, if you are doing the testing, they're also doing validation along to see if there's any deviation or to see if the process is in control. It's more of like monitoring and evaluation, M&E kind of validation. Okay, let's look at revalidation. Revalidation is part of the type of a validation. What is revalidation? Revalidation simply means repeating the original validation effort of any, either part of it or everything. It has to do with majorly investigating reviews of existing performance data. This approach is essential to maintain the validation status of that plant, equipment, process, and the rest. Let's say, for example, now you validate your PCR equipment or your hematology equipment. In 6 months' time, you are revalidating it to see if the original validation is still intact. So revalidation can be categorized based on periodic validation or validation due to changes. So let's say, for example, periodic validation is one I said, let's say 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, etc. Validation due to changes is, let's say, for example, you move an equipment now. Okay, let me use Lagos, for example. You move an equipment from Surulere to Victoria Island. You have to revalidate it to see if that movement, that changes has affected any of it or not. So I use let's say, for example, now you're in Lagos, your lab is in your Abuja, your lab is in, let's say, Asokoro, and you're going to Metama, you will need to revalidate that instrument due to that what changes. So these are two major things that result to revalidation: periodic and scheduled revalidation, the revalidation due to changes. What are the reasons for revalidation? Please look at the screen. Number one, when you transfer a product or an equipment from one place to the other, you validate. Changes of a product, you evaluate. When there's a significant increase, you validate. When there are sequential batches that fail to meet the production specification, you validate. The necessity of periodic checking of the validation result, all these are reasons. The scope, when the scope of the validation has changed or the scope of the service has changed, you have to validate. Am I communicating? What is the importance of validation? Importance of validation. When the purpose of a thing is not known, definitely you only abuse it. Why do we validate? To maintain and assure a high degree of quality of both food, drugs, reagents, method, process, procedures. We want to assure the highest quality of it. Provide a high degree of assurance that every step, process, and changes have been properly evaluated before it is implemented. Remember, testing the final product and it is not considered sufficient evidence that every product within the batch meets the required specification. So you have to validate. To help to produce consistency, reproducibility, desired result, which meets the quality standard of a product or a services. To help for process optimization, to help to reduce the quality of cost, few rejection, few retesting and inspection. All these are important of what? Validation. Now, look at this. Now, in the lab, basically, this is according to the ISO 15199-2012. This slide was done during the 2012 ISO standard. Now, look at it. We have instrument validation, method validation here, and validation of results. What does the ISO standard say about validation of instrument? Listen and listen carefully. Please pay rapt attention to this. So can you all hear me? You can hear me. Type on the comment section that you can hear me. I want to be sure that you are hearing what I'm saying. Yes, once again, it's on this call. You're hearing. If you can hear me, type what you can see. We have instrument validation, method validation, validation of result. What does the ISO standard say about this? I'm just hearing one person. Are you with me? Can you hear me? Okay, I can hear you. Thank you. So, what does the standard say about equipment validation? Please listen. Equipment shall. Anytime you hear the word shall, it means this what? What does shall mean in the ISO standard? If type on the comment section if you know. What does shall mean? What does shall mean? What does shall mean? Anytime you see the word shall, what does it mean? Please type on the comment section. What does shall mean? What does shall mean? No, I don't say you should type what I say. Tell me what when you hear the word shall, what does it mean in standard? The ISO standard. What does that mean? What does that word mean, shall? A necessary action. Yes, it means a must. Yes, it's a must, compulsory. Yes, so I want to also use this medium to invite you to our ISO 15189 2022 training. It's going to be a bomb. Starting from 8th. This cohort is starting from on the 8th of November to 18th. So we are going to be digesting the standard one by one, one by one. So what does this standard say? It said, according to for the instrument validation, equipment shall not be used until it has been verified through examination of quality control samples and the use of documentation of the suppliers in conformity of QMS. So what does it mean? Thou shalt not use an equipment until you have validated it. So if you are using an equipment without validation, that is quackery. The laboratory shall develop a program that regularly monitors a proper calibration and function of the instrument and program for preventive what? Maintenance. You hear that? What does the standard say about method validation? It said that the laboratory shall only use validated procedure which are as extensive as necessary to meet the need in the given application. So you cannot just go to market and buy a new malaria kit and start using. You have to validate that process extensively. What it means extensively, you will have to cover all outcome of the result, possible result. All possible outcomes must be covered. The laboratory shall document the procedure used for validation. So as an auditor, if I come and say, okay, you validated, where the validation result show, okay, and the next thing I will ask, where the procedure? Where's your SOP for validation? We need to we just did this, yeah. So as well as the result of validation. So the procedure of validation must be documented. The result of validation must also be recommended. The procedure shall be reviewed on a regular basis. The review shall be documented. Now, what does it say about validation of results? Result now we're talking about which is the end product. The laboratory shall have documented procedure for the release of examination results. So there must be a way whereby you are validating those results, those patient results before they are sent out. Am I communicating? It's interesting. If it's interesting, please type on the chat box. It is interesting. If it's confusing, type it's confusing. If I'm too fast, please type I'm too fast. It's just a feedback. I hope you are getting the vibe, you are getting the gist on validation. Please, I need a feedback on it. It's quite interesting. Okay, someone said quite interesting. Thank you for that. It's quite interesting. What is again? I'm waiting to read from the next person. Yes, are you there? Okay, it's interesting. It's interesting. Okay, someone said it's interesting. Thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you. So we proceed. So when you want to validate, look at the process. A non-standard method, a new method. Design method by develop method, you pick it. Now, the next thing you validate before you use a process, method, or equipment, you validate it. Now, after that, what do? You define the performance characteristics. Performance characteristics is what I'm going to teach you, what does performance characteristics means? Let's say, for example, when it says somebody is performing, an equipment is performing, there are characteristics that measure the performance. Let's say, for example, in football, a striker is performing when he scores goal. That is a characteristics. So what are the characteristics that define this performance? So as extensive as necessary to confirm through the provision of what objective evidence. When you have done that, you document and record all the results obtained and procedure for validation. Then you do continuous validation when necessary. Now, I will explain this as we go on. Validation of experimental procedures. Now, the validation process consists of 6 parts. Analysis of available scientific document, experimental procedure, evaluation of the intended use of the experimental procedure, evaluation of that procedure, identification of the performance characteristics of specific test procedure, definition of the test procedure, identification of the acceptability criterion for evaluation of results. Because where there is no goal post, there cannot be goal. So it's the goal post that determines the goal. Production of the validation certificate, which is also the final stage of the validation. Now, let's look at key method of performance parameter. You know, I talked about performance characteristics. What are the things you look at for? What are the performance characteristics when you are evaluating? Now, we are narrowing it down to the test. One is precision. You have to do a precision study, accuracy study. You have to check for bias, selectivity, limit of detection, limit of quantification, and linearity and ruggedness. You look at the screen. You have to check for precision. Precision is the ability for the equipment to produce a consistent result, or the method to produce a consistent result. That's precision. Let's say, for example, for an equipment, you are validating a glucose. If it's giving 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, 4.8, 4.9, 4.8, 4.2, it shows you what that equipment is precise. But something can be precise and yet not accurate. True or true? True. So something can be precise and yet it's not what? Accurate. I want to say interesting, but confusing. Okay, that's why we're here to explain. And please jot down your question, and as we go along, I will explain. Now, accuracy is the ability to produce closeness to the real result, or to the original result, or to original expected outcome. Bias is either above or below. It's on one side. Limit of detection is, what is the limit of that detection? Let's say, for example, a malaria kit now. They will tell you, most of us, when we buy this reagent, we don't look at the packaging inside. Look at the PI, read it. They will tell you that this malaria kit can only detect one when the parasite is up to 1,000 per micro blood feed. So it means that once the parasite is less than that, that test kit cannot measure it. That's one limit of detection. We have linearity of the equipment. Even also for quantitative, when some kind of reagent test, once it's less than maybe 20, it cannot analyze it. Let's say, for example, some PSA, once it's above maybe 2,000, it cannot detect it. You have to start doing dilution. So that shows you the limit of what? Detection. We have linearity and ruggedness. This I will explain. Ruggedness is the ability. Okay. Okay. I will ask this. I will throw this to you as a question. Go and find out what is the ruggedness of an equipment. What does a ruggedness of an equipment or ruggedness of a test method is? Please take it down. I'll type it on the chat box. What is the ruggedness of an equipment or a test method? Anyone you can see. Now, selectivity too. Now, there are some of the equipment method that have a selective process. Selectivity, it selects a particular thing to do, what not to do, and all. So those are part of things that are to be measured. Now, we'll explain some of these things to us, how we do it. Now, listing. Okay. Now, what precision? You see, I've explained all these things here. Can you see it in my slide? So, but let's go back again. Please, for those that say it's confusing, just listen, you'll get it. A test method is said to be precise when the repeated determination on the same sample give a similar result. When a test method is precise, the amount of random variation is small. In other words, it's clinically significant. So all the 4.1 millimole per liter to 4.2 millimole per liter, that's a clinically insignificant difference. The test, the instrument, and the laboratory personnel each introduce a small amount of variability. So test method, instrument, the personnel has a way of introducing what? A small amount of variability. So precision can also indicate how well a method or an instrument gives the same result when a single sample is tested repeatedly. So you test a sample, you run it, now you run it again, run it again, run it again. Want to see if that equipment can give similar results. There's two types of precision. We have within run precision and between run precision. Now listen to this. Now within run precision provides a method. Within run, between run. Within run is that you run the test now, it comes to an end, you run it again, it comes to an end, you run it within that same day. That is within run precision. Between run precision, you run it today, that same sample, you run it, or that same QC, you run it today, tomorrow you run it, next tomorrow you run it. That is within run, between run. Between, that is in between days, within the same day. Now, a good precision study must include minimum of 20 to 50 repeatable runs. So you cannot do a precision of 10, 5. That's not precision. It has to do with minimum of 20. Why do we do 20? N has to be equal or greater than 20 for statistical analysis to be valid. How many of you remember that? Oh, I remember a few weeks ago I was trying to teach this somewhere. I was doing a bell shape. How many of you remember statistics, bell shape, distribution curve? So those are practical explanations to those things that you are learning, what we are doing now. Runs or replicable should be calculated for. So if you do that 20 to 50 runs, depending on your established number you want to do according to what your quality manual states, but you cannot do less than 20. You calculate the mean, the HD, and the coefficient of variation. So if you have a QC material that is repeated for 30 days, now let's say this is it. The sum total of the results is 3346. Now this is 30 days. This is between study precision. Now the mean is divided by the number summation x bar equals to summation of fx over x. I don't know if I remember that. So 3346 by 30 will give you 11.6. Now standard deviation, you do the standard deviation. You all of you remember the standard deviation formula. If you don't remember, you can check your Google Maths and it will bring out square meter of EFS x bar minus x2 squared all over EFS. That is standard deviation. Then
When you calculate the standard deviation, you calculate coefficient of variation. All this formula, you can use Excel sheet to calculate, you can use software to calculate it. You don't want to do manual stuff. The 95% confidence interval is between plus or minus 2 standard deviation, which is 1110 to 1132. How did we get that? Now, remember the standard, the mean is 11.6. Now, if you look at, if you have gone through the course, you see in hematology and chemistry, you see where I explained this during the Westgard rule. So that middle line you are seeing is the mean line. The first line above is the first standard deviation. The second line above is minus 2 standard deviation. It can be minus, it can be plus. Now, mean is 116 here. Now, if you add 116 plus 0.8, what will it give you? Hello? Talk to me. If you add 116 plus 0.8, what will it give you?
One 2.4.
Yes, 112.4. So that is plus 1 standard deviation. If you minus 116 minus 0.8, that is the result of minus 1 standard deviation. So that's another way to calculate it manually using a certain limit. Now, that is standard deviation. Standard deviation, what is standard deviation in practical sense? Is the deviation from the mean, the standard deviation from the mean. That is standard deviation. And the closer it is to the mean, the more accurate it is. So that deviation. So now in clinical practice, your result must not be greater than 2 standard deviation. Now before they used to allow 3 standard deviation, but practically for 95% confidence interval, 95% confidence interval is also known as 0.5 level of significance. How many of us remember that in statistics? Yeah, so we are saying that we are 95% sure of this result. The same thing as 0.5 level of confidence interval. No, level of significance. Somebody wanted a presentation and they asked him, what is the level of significance of this your data you did? And the person said 95%. And that level of significance means that there is 95% error. There was no difference between confidence interval and level of significance. The 95% confidence interval is equal to 0.5 level of significance. So in other words, we are only allowing a 5% error or deviations. Now, so we have plus or minus 2 standard deviation, plus minus 1, plus minus 2, minus 1, minus 2 at the both end of the graph. So what are the information that is needed when you need to do all these things? You need the manufacturer's validation study, the reference ranges, the instrument manual, the packaging chart, any relevant information regarding the instrument or the method. The method kit must be the same, similar to the acceptable methodology. The turnaround time of the new test, instrument, method, the ruggedness and robustness, the analytical range, interference, stability. What are the things that could interfere with the test, with the process? You need to know all this. All this information has to look at it. Mean, summation of Fs over F, summation of F, standard deviation there. Coefficient of variation is standard deviation divided by mean. That is the coefficient of variation. Number 2, what is the importance of coefficient of variation in a test method? Read that up and let me know. What is the importance of coefficient of variation for a test method? No, how many of us understand when we say what is specificity and sensitivity of a test method? specificity and sensitivity of a test method. What does that mean? When you say a test method is specific and is sensitive, so there's specificity and there's sensitivity. Now, HD, that I have said, is primary measures of the dispersion or variation of the individual result in comparison of the mean value. The easiest way to calculate SD is to use the statistical tool present in a spreadsheet such as Excel. You can just calculate it. CV is the standard deviation expressed in percentage of the mean. Standard deviation over mean times 100. That's why CV is always usually in percentage. The higher the standard deviation, the greater the percentage of the mean it becomes, and the higher this percentage was CV. Let's look at bias. Bias is defined as the estimate of the systematic error. So if you go back, that's why we treated that QC in hematology and chemistry before this course. You see bias. You see bias when they are running. We have positive bias and negative bias. So they are consistently running above the mean, consistently running below the mean. Those are bias. Ruggedness of a test. I've given you this one as an assignment. So go and read it up. But it's already here on this, which you can see. Or read it up. What's the ruggedness of a test? Designed to the highest to test variable and allow them to be tightened if necessary. So read it up. What does it mean, the ruggedness of a test method? Site selection. When you are doing a validation, well, let's say you have to make sure that you pick a site for your validation for a particular process, a particular method, a particular test. You must have a place of doing your validation. That's what we call site selection. Now let's look at the validation master plan, the VMP. The VMP outlined the principle involved in qualification of the facility, defining the area, the process, the product, the system to be validated, and provide a written program for achieving and maintaining a qualified facility for validation. So the validation master plan is like your architectural structure for building. It is not when a man starts building, you know that this is going to be a 3-bedroom bungalow. From the master plan, you have read about master plan of Abuja, master plan of Lagos. So there's a design for every area. There's the where it's going to be the commercial area, there's where it's going to be the private area, residential area from the master plan. There's where it's going to be a road. That's why if you build house in a place where there's supposed to be road, at the end of the day, it's going to be demolished. So master plan is like a project. It's like a document, a plan that articulates everything, both the qualification, the design, the process, the timeline, everything. The protocol. Am I communicating? Okay. If you're not communicating, you can drop your. If you have any questions so far, you can drop it on the chat box. Even as I try to take this a little bit deeper. So the master plan are written to assist the organization with the validation strategy or to provide control over a specific process. The validation master plan is different from validation SOP, which describes specific process for performing a validation. So the validation SOP tells you a particular process, let's say cleaning or testing, but the master plan comprises of the whole process. What needs to be done and what should be done and how it should be done, when it should be done. Now, remember I talked about qualification earlier. We talked about design qualification, installation qualification, operational qualification, and performance qualification. I deal with performance qualification just now when I'm talking about precision, accuracy, selectivity, and the rest. Now, design qualification is to ensure that all specified design of elements have been included and that the design meets the relevant regulatory and statutory requirement. That is design. Installation qualification shows that the equipment, the system has been properly installed, supplied as specified, integrated to the site, calibrated, done everything. So there is no issues with what installation. The engineer, whoever that is doing installation, have installed the process. That is installation qualification. So it must meet that qualification before validation takes place. Then operational qualification shows me that the equipment is actually working properly. But if the equipment is not working properly, how do you validate? So these are prerequisites for validation.
operational qualification, complying with the functionality requirement. It has to be integrated into the system and into the QMS. Am I communicating? This is so interesting. I'm feeling happy. I don't know about you. Okay. If you feel same with me, you can put on the chat box. We're happy to hear what you are hearing. You can communicate your feelings to me on the chat box. Okay, I'm waiting for one or two feedback. Are you excited and happy about what you are hearing? Okay, I'm waiting for your feedback. We move, but reduce your speed. Okay. Okay, I will.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, yes, you can hear me. Share my screen. Okay. Follow me for that break. So as I was saying, so we have looked at the those last qualification. I talked about the operational qualification. Look about performance qualification, which I showed you earlier. The equipment system process continuously meeting the performance criteria for routine use. Those has to do the accuracy, precisions, and the rest. Those are part of what the performance qualification. Now, this is validation master plan, the WHO guide. Validation master plan is a high-level document that establishes an umbrella for validation plan for the entire project and summarize the manufacturer's overall philosophy and approach. It provides information on the manufacturer's validation work program that's already been done, define details of the time scale for the validation work to be performed, including a statement of the responsibility of those implementing the plan. Now, what is the importance of the validation master plan? It helps the management to know the validation plan, helps them to plan for time, money, people, and understand the necessity of the program. It represents the life cycle of a validation process. Most importantly, it serves as a good tool for project planning. It allows you to agree upon and document an overall process and evaluation strategy. It serves as a clear justification for the why the validation should be done, the importance of the validation, also provide evidence for regulatory bodies, such especially for accreditations, government, and the rest. It allows you to show a control of the quality system and process or product quality. So validation is part of process control. If you're asking where does validation fall on the quality system essential, it's part of what? The process control. Helps all members of the validation team to know their tasks and their responsibility. All the characteristics of a good validation master plan. Every prospective, concurrent, and retrospective validation activities. It details the personnel and the facility management who have agreed to the plan, the time, the location, the order of validation, everything. It's a statement describing the validation policy of an organization. So it summarizes all the scope of operation with description of the facilities and the processes. It will help, it also have what? It must also have a reference appendix, detailed plan for the validation master plan. So a good validation master plan should have a title page, an authorization, table of content on the philosophy of the approach to validation, rules and responsibility of relevant personnel, resources to ensure validation is done. Change, control, evaluation, deviation, training, scope of validation, premises, equipment qualification, process validation, all this and many more has to be in the validation master plan, including personnel qualification, analytical method to be done. So validation master plan is like the quality document for validation. What the quality manual is to quality, what safety manual is to safety management. So validation master plan is to validation process.
talks about the life cycle management, the qualification, revalidation, relationship with other quality management system elements, validation matrices, and references. The VMP should be reviewed at a regular interval and keep it up to date. Before I conclude, please listen to this. Can you all hear me? Please, if you can hear me, type on the chat box.
We can hear you.
If you can hear me, just type. So now, when we are doing validation, first you have to have a validation master plan for your organization. Now, validation is not hard. Forget all this grammar that we have been speaking. It's a very simple process. It can require time, effort, money, because some facility will not want you to be spending reagents. Say, what are you doing? You're wasting our reagent. But if they don't understand the essence of validation, not every equipment that you have that can carry some kind of test, even when the manufacturer said they can do it. There are some, I could remember one equipment that was brought into a facility, and after validation, it failed validation. And we told them that this equipment will DB and total DB direct delivery will not function well on this equipment. They say, if it can do that, you should do it. At the end of the day, the clinicians started having issues with those results. That's a proof of validation. And sometimes, let's say for example, you buy a PCR equipment, for example, and you have been using it to run HIV viral load, and you want to start using it to run Lassa fever. You can't just buy the reagent and start using. Or let's say, for example, now you have been using Sangene PCR kit. I want to go to Gene Finder. That extraction, that amplification kit, you have to validate it. That's the way it works. So every test in an equipment must be validated before it is used. You can't say, well, I'll be using it for once there's a change in the scope of the validation, and you cannot use a unvalidated method to validate a new method. Must be a validated method to validate a new method, because two wrongs can never make a right. So simple validation. Let's say, for example, now I have a new malaria kit. I can decide to validate it against another malaria kit that has already been validated, or against the gold standard, using the known to measure the unknown. Unknown test to measure the known test. Unknown method to measure the known method to measure the unknown method. So I can decide to say, okay, I run 50 samples. Remember, if I'm running 50 samples, every of the possible results must be captured. So if I'm running a kit, 1 plus will be there, 2 plus will be there, something that is be looking fancy will be there. So if I'm running a quantitative method, you have either it can be normal or abnormal. It can either be abnormally low or abnormally high. So all those 3 possible results has to be covered. So you run for low, let's say minimum of 20 samples. You run for high, minimum of 20 samples. You run for normal, minimum of 20 samples. And you calculate your standard deviations and you do your statistical analysis. Then upon your statistical analysis, you can now determine if it's accepted or not accepted. You're using the coefficient of variation, using standard deviation, mean, and the rest stuff, and you find. So if you have a protocol, sometimes it's very easy. You just do your calculation. If it's quantitative test, put it on the Excel sheet. If it's accepted, you should it's accepted. If it's not accepted, it shows that it fails. And when running quantitative method, avoid what they call it, you see numbers that are very, very far off. They call it random numbers. If you are doing a test, you're having 21, 22, 34, you now generate one result is 85. If you put it, you're going to spoil your data. Am I communicating? So by way of conclusion, validation is a critical part of the quality management system. Whether it is a process, facility, equipment, or a product, This can be successfully by following the validation process, the procedure, and executing it with the aid of the validation master plan. The need to revalidate equipment, process, and method when the need arises cannot be overemphasized to maintain and sustain a quality process, product, and what? Services. Okay, before I open the chat box for you to ask your question, if you have a question, you can type it. Yeah, I'm just giving a few minutes.